He built his wedding like a victory parade. Crystal chandeliers, 300 guests, a bride from old money, a billionaire father-in-law seated in the front row. Every detail designed to say the same thing. He had won. And in the fourth row, perfectly positioned with a clear view of the altar, sat the woman who had built his company. He had invited her there on purpose, not out of courtesy, not out of closure. He wanted her to watch him succeed without her, to see what he had become, to understand what she had lost. What he did not know was that at exactly 4:47 p.m., the company in his name would no longer belong to him. And the man seated beside her, the one who did not clap during the vows, who did not smile for the photographs, was not there to celebrate. He was there to collect. And before that reception ended, 300 guests would witness the difference between access and ownership. She spent 6 years building a company from nothing, writing every proposal, closing every deal, working through grief, through exhaustion, through the quiet understanding that no one in that office worked harder than she did. And when it finally became profitable, when the name on the door finally meant something, her husband sat across from her at dinner and told her he needed someone more polished at his side. 2 years later, he mailed her a wedding invitation with a handwritten note. No hard feelings. He wanted her to come, wanted her to sit in that room and watch him win. She should have declined. Instead, she made one phone call to a man whose name in certain rooms in Seoul made grown men lower their eyes and speak carefully. Now, let's go back to where his carefully planned humiliation truly began. The envelope arrived on a Thursday morning, cream paper, heavy. The kind of weight that announces its own expense before you have even broken the seal. Charlotte Osei held it in both hands for a moment before opening it. She already knew who it was from. She recognized the handwriting, the deliberate, slightly arrogant slope of the letter she had watched sign contracts she had written for 6 years. The way he still wrote her name like it was something that belonged to him. Inside was a wedding invitation, gold embossed edges. Callum Dre and Solene Vance request the honor of your presence. She read it twice, set it on the kitchen counter, looked at it. Then she found the note, paperclip to the back. Charlotte, thought you'd want to see how things turned out. No hard feelings. See. No hard feelings. She stood in her studio apartment in the city she had moved to after the divorce and felt something cold and quiet move through her chest. Not grief, not anger. Something older and more patient than both. Something her mother would have recognized immediately. Her mother, who had left Accra at 22 with 2 suitcases and an engineering degree from the University of Ghana, who had built a life in a country that did not make it easy, who raised Charlotte on one principle above all others. You do not waste good emotion on people who have proven they do not deserve it. You study the situation, you think clearly. Then you move. Charlotte studied the situation. Callum had not sent this out of courtesy. He had sent it because he wanted her there, wanted her to dress up, drive to whatever expensive venue he had chosen, and sit in an audience full of people who knew exactly what had happened between them and watch him win. And the worst part was that he expected her to come. He had spent 6 years watching her absorb whatever he gave her and keep going, and he had mistaken her endurance for submission. She went to her bathroom cabinet, reached behind the spare towels on the top shelf, pulled out a small envelope she had placed there several months ago, and told herself she would probably never open again. Inside was a card, heavy stock, just a name and a number. She picked up her phone. She dialed. Before we go any further, you need to understand what Charlotte built and what it cost her. When she first walked into Callum Dre's consultancy, it had one client, $30,000 in debt, and a name that meant nothing to anyone. 6 years later, it billed 8 figures annually, 42 major corporate clients, a reputation that crossed 3 industries. Charlotte had built all of it. Not as metaphor, she had written every proposal, identified every client, negotiated every significant contract. She had worked the week her father called from Accra to say her grandmother had passed, cried in the office bathroom for 10 minutes, then washed her face and went back to the pitch because it was due the next morning. She had worked the way her parents had raised her to work, completely. with the understanding absorbed before she could articulate it, that in rooms where people did not expect you to be the most capable person present, you had to be so undeniably capable that the room had no choice but to reckon with it. Callum had smiled at clients, played golf, signed his name to documents Charlotte had written, stood at industry events and talked about what he had built with the confidence of a man who had never examined the gap between what he said and what was true. When the firm became profitable, when Callum Dre became a name worth knowing, he looked across their dinner table and told her he needed someone different beside him. The word he used was polished. He said it with his eyes slightly to the left of her face, a habit he had when saying something he knew was wrong but had already committed to. He had already met Celine Vance, daughter of Aldrich Vance, founder of Vance Capital, a woman who had never worked anywhere without her family name on the wall. The divorce took 4 months. Her lawyer said she could fight. Charlotte said she was tired. She was not lying. The tiredness of a black woman who has been the most competent person in a room for years and still watched the credit go somewhere else. The tiredness of doing the work and learning finally that the work alone was never going to be enough. She took her clothes, her car, and her silence. She did not take the house or the savings account. All of it was in his name. But she kept copies of everything she had ever built. Every proposal in both drafts, every client email, every contract in the version she had written and the version he had signed, backed up to a drive in her bedside drawer. She did not know then why she was keeping them, only that they were hers and she would not leave them behind. She found smaller work, lived in 600 square feet, told herself it was temporary, told herself that again for 2 years, until the Thursday morning the invitation arrived. Now, there is something you need to understand about the man Charlotte called, because how they met matters. 8 months before the invitation, Charlotte was staying at the Keswick Hotel on a business trip. Client meeting that ran late. Budget room. Nothing remarkable. She was getting ready for bed when a knock came. A hotel staff member, holding a sealed envelope. Miss Osei, apologies for the hour. This was left for you at the front desk. She opened it, read the first page, stopped, read it again. The documents inside were not hers. What they contained were financial routing records, shell company structures, ownership chains across 4 countries that together formed the outline of something large, deliberate, and not intended to be visible to anyone outside a very specific circle. She sat on the edge of the bed, looked at the documents. She understood 2 things simultaneously. First, that she was holding something people had been seriously hurt for. Second, that she had a choice. She thought about her mother, who understood that the most important intelligence a woman can have is knowing which battles are hers and which ones will simply consume her. Charlotte photographed every page, thorough, methodical. Then she resealed the envelope, went downstairs, told the night manager there had been a delivery error, and went to bed. She did not sleep well, but she slept. At 6 in the morning, another knock. She opened the door. The man in the hallway was perhaps 35, Korean, dark suit, fitted like a decision rather than a garment, very still, not relaxed still, disciplined still, the kind of stillness you learn when you have grown up in a world where sudden movement has consequences. His eyes moved to both ends of the corridor before settling on her. At the base of his throat, above his open collar, was the beginning of a tattoo, dark geometric lines disappearing beneath the fabric. She did not know enough then to read what it said. She would learn later. What she understood in that moment was that it was not decorative. "You returned the documents," he said. "Yes." "You opened them first." Not a question. "Yes." "Why give them back?" "Because whatever those documents belong to has nothing to do with me, and I would like it to keep it that way." He looked at her with the specific attention of someone conducting a full assessment without appearing to move. Then, "May I come in?" She should have said no. She stepped back and let him in. His name was Ryo Sion. He spoke with the careful precision of a man who selects words the way lawyers do, technically accurate, deliberately incomplete. He used phrases like family interests and legacy business, What lived underneath those phrases, in the silence around them, was something she did not need a polite name for. Because Ryo Seon was not a man with complicated investments. The Seon family had built their power over 3 generations through means not discussed in polite settings, relationships enforced rather than chosen, a reputation that arrived in rooms before they did. Ryo was trying to move the family out of that world. 5 years of slow, difficult work. There were people who did not want it to happen and were willing to demonstrate that with force. The documents Charlotte had returned had been stolen by one of them, someone who wanted leverage over that process. She had returned them without using them, without asking what they were worth. "You could have leveraged those documents," he said. "I know. Most people would have. I'm not most people." Something in his expression shifted, barely. "No," he said, "you are not." He placed a card on the table between them, just his name, a number. "I owe you a debt. Call if you ever need anything, without limitation." He left. She put the card behind the spare towels in her bathroom cabinet, filed the whole experience under things she did not fully understand and would not discuss, went to her meeting, came home, moved on. What she did not know was that Ryo Seon had researched her thoroughly within 24 hours of that conversation, not out of suspicion, out of discipline. You do not let a stranger walk away from sensitive documents without knowing exactly who that stranger is. He found everything: her background, her parents' story, the consultancy she had built and lost, Kalimdori's name on everything she had created, the settlement she had accepted when she no longer had the energy to fight. He read all of it, and then, because he was precisely the man he was, he did not simply file it and wait. He began moving, quietly, methodically, building the legal structure that would make what he had in mind possible: a holding company, an acquisition mechanism, a financial architecture that would require only one thing to activate: her call. 8 months later, she called. He answered on the second ring, "Miss Osei," like he had known it would be her. "I said if I ever needed anything. I did. And there is something you should know before we discuss anything else. I have been moving pieces into position since the morning after we met at the Keswick. When I read your file, I understood what had been done to you. I built the mechanism to correct it. I was waiting for you to decide you were ready." Charlotte was quiet for a moment. "You did not know I would call," she said. "No, but I prepared as though you would." A pause. "Do you want to walk into that wedding looking like someone he underestimated, or do you want to walk out of it having taken back what was yours?" She thought about her mother, about what it means to be patient for a very long time and then decide, finally, to move. "Both," she said. "Then I need the dates and the copies I believe you kept." "I have everything," she said. "Every draft, every client email, every contract." "Of course you do." And she believed he had known that before she said it. "Don't buy a dress. Someone will contact you tomorrow." "I can't let you—" "Charlotte." Her name in his mouth had weight. "The debt I owe you is larger than a dress. Let me begin somewhere." He ended the call. She stood in her small apartment. For the first time in 2 years, she felt something that was not exhaustion. The stylist arrived at 8 the morning of the wedding. 2 assistants, rolling cases. She did not ask what Charlotte preferred or what she was comfortable in. She looked at her the way her mother had always looked at a problem, fully and without the distortion of prior expectation. Then she began. The dress arrived at 10, hand-delivered in a sealed black box. Charlotte opened it alone. Deep crimson, not the soft, apologetic red of flowers, the deep, settled red of old things, of something that has decided what it is and does not require discussion. The cut was structural, a fitted bodice, clean lines, not one decorative element, a dress designed by someone who understood that the most powerful statement a garment can make is to ask for nothing and assume everything. She put it on, stood in front of her mirror. The woman looking back was not the woman who had signed the divorce papers, not the woman who had carried boxes into this apartment and told herself it was fine, not the woman who had spent 2 years making herself quieter and smaller. This woman looked like she had been on her way somewhere this whole time. Her phone chimed. Car at 4, small box on the counter, RS. The box held earrings, diamond set in brushed white gold, the kind of simplicity that costs more than ornate things ever do, because the simplicity itself is the craft. She put them on, picked up her bag, locked her door, walked downstairs. One black car at the curb, not 3, not a display, one car. Because Rio Seon was not a man who needed to announce himself. His presence was its own announcement. He stepped out when she reached the pavement. Black 3-piece suit, no tie, collar open at the throat. And the tattoo, visible now in the afternoon light. Dark geometric lines running down the left side of his neck. Precise, deliberate, unmistakable to anyone who knew what they were reading. Which family, which rank, which tier of something that most people inside that wedding would be quietly grateful they had no direct knowledge of. He looked at her, did not speak for a moment. Then simply, Callum Dre has no idea what he gave up. Not flattery, the flat correction of a factual error. She felt something warm and steady move through her chest. "Let's go," she said. They got into the car. The Graymere Hotel occupied an entire city block. Old stone, old money. The kind of building that appeared in architecture publications and society columns, and never in the same week. Callum had booked it over a year in advance, had almost certainly sat somewhere imagining this day many times, the day Charlotte Osei walked in and saw what he had built without her. The car stopped at the entrance at 4:47, 13 minutes before the ceremony. Rio stepped out first, straightened his jacket with 2 precise, unhurried movements, extended his hand. Charlotte took it and stepped onto the pavement. No motorcade, no theater. Just Charlotte Osei in a crimson dress that caught the afternoon light like a declaration, and the man beside her who moved through the world as though the space had already agreed to arrange itself around him. They walked up the steps. The guests went quiet. Not gradually, all at once. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. People turned, stared, looked away, looked back. At the entrance, the coordinator found Charlotte's name on the list. Her eyes moved to Rio, to the card he had placed quietly beside the guest book as they passed. She looked at the card, then looked at it again. Her expression underwent a complete and visible recalibration. Not just professional adjustment, the specific, careful stillness of a person who has just understood what room they are in. "Of course, Mr. Seon." Her voice was different than it had been for the previous 300 guests. "Please allow me to find you a better position." 4th row, center. Perfect sightlines to the altar. The seating of people who matter, given by someone who understood from a name on a card that these people mattered very much. Around them, guests made calculations. Charlotte could see it, eyes moving from her dress to Rio to her again, conversations restarting at a different register. Former colleagues, clients she had brought in personally, sat across from, solved real problems for. Friends of Callum who had stopped returning her calls after the divorce with the quiet efficiency of people choosing the more useful side of the story. They were all looking at her now, not with the careful pity she had grown accustomed to, with something she had not seen directed at herself in a long time. Recalculation. She sat down, back straight, the way her mother had always insisted, not from vanity, but from the understanding that how you hold your body tells a room what to think before you have said a word. She waited. Callum walked in from the side entrance at 5 o'clock exactly. He looked exactly the same. That was the thing about men like Callum. They stayed exactly the same because nothing had ever given them a reason to change. Still handsome in the photogenic, uncomplicated way, still carrying himself with the ease of a man who had always found the world arranged conveniently around him and had never had cause to wonder why. He took his place at the altar, smiled at the room, worked it the way he always had, with the natural confidence of a man who understood that charm, deployed consistently, was a substitute for most other things. Then his eyes swept the front rows, found Charlotte. She watched him almost manage not to react. She had spent 6 years learning the micro-expressions that preceded his larger ones. She saw it. Genuine surprise, then rapid calculation, then something moving toward unease. His eyes shifted to Ryo, stayed there half a second too long. Something in his face tightened. Then the music changed. Solange Vance walked down the aisle and the room turned toward her. The officiant began. Charlotte sat through all of it with her back straight and her face arranged into polite attention. The readings, the vows, the practiced performance of permanence. Beside her, Ryo glanced at his phone once, put it away, waited. At the traditional pause, the silence before forever, Ryo did not move. Neither did Charlotte. The officiant continued. The pronouncement, the kiss. 300 people broke into warm, celebratory noise. As the couple walked back down the aisle, Callum looked directly at Charlotte. And there it was, the whole reason for the invitation, the entire architecture of this small cruelty, completely and simply readable. I won. You came. You watched. And I won. Charlotte looked back at him and smiled, just slightly. The smile of someone holding information the other person does not have yet. She watched it land, watched the certainty in his eyes shift into something that was not quite certainty anymore. One brief flicker of it, and then the crowd absorbed him into congratulations and champagne and the warm noise of the reception beginning. But she had seen it. Good, she thought. Sit with that feeling for a while. The ballroom was everything Callum would have chosen. Crystal chandeliers, white flowers and arrangements that spoke a very specific language about what things cost. A live band playing the kind of smooth, expensive music that says this is permanent, this matters, this is exactly what it looks like. Tables set with china and silver, the complete architecture of a celebration designed to impress. Champagne circulated, guests settled. Speeches began. Aldrich Vance went first, Solange's father, founder of Vance Capital, a man who had spent decades in rooms full of power and had learned to inhabit them without effort. He talked about legacy, about 2 families coming together, about Callum Dre's promising future and what they would build. He was perhaps 4 sentences from the end when his phone vibrated. He looked at it. One glance, less than 2 seconds. His face did not change, but something behind his eyes did. The very controlled, very specific shift of a person who has received information that has just rewritten the situation they believed they were standing in. He excused himself from the podium, smoothly, just the right amount of apology, just slightly too much urgency for a man with nothing pressing. He walked out of the ballroom. At the head table, Solange frowned, leaned toward Callum. He shrugged, smiled at the room, filled the moment he always filled moments with surface. Ryo checked his phone, said quietly without looking at Charlotte, "It's starting." She said nothing. She watched. The best man finished his speech. Laughter, applause. The first dance began. Callum and Solange moved well together, practiced. He had always been good at the things that photographed well. The song ended, the floor opened, the band played on. That was when the venue manager appeared, not the coordinator from the entrance, someone senior, moving across the ballroom with the controlled urgency of someone managing a situation they very much do not want the room to notice they are managing. She reached the events lead. Brief exchange. The events lead's face went pale. She turned and walked quickly toward the back corridor. At table 11, one of Callum's senior business partners looked at his phone, expression moving from relaxed to careful in a single breath. He murmured to his wife. They stood, unhurried, and moved toward the exit. Table 7, the same. Table 3, table 9, one by one. the way people leave a building when they are not certain the structure will hold. The dancing continued, the music continued, but something was draining away from the edges of the room, slowly at first, then faster and faster. Callum was still on the floor, laughing, fully at ease. Then his phone rang. He checked it. His smile dimmed. He stepped off the floor and moved to the edge of the room, one finger pressed to his ear against the noise. From 15 feet away, Charlotte could not hear the words, but she could read the body language with the precision of someone who had spent 6 years studying it. Controlled, then not. He hung up, dialed. His face changed, dialed again and again. Solane crossed the floor to him, touched his arm. He did not answer her. Aldrich Vance reappeared at the ballroom entrance. He did not walk in the way he had walked out. He moved with the purpose of a man who has just had a conversation that dismantled everything he understood about where he was standing. Stone-faced, direct, he went straight to Solane. "We are leaving," he said. "Dad, what?" "Now." "The reception." "There is no more reception." He looked at Callum, the look of old money that has been lied to, which is quieter and more devastating than shouting ever is. "You told me you owned the firm outright, controlling interest, $8 million in assets, 15 major client contracts in your name." "I do," Callum said. His voice had lost something. As of 4:47 this afternoon, every asset you presented to me is gone. The contracts are no longer registered to you. The accounts you used to fund this evening are frozen. The firm you told me you ran now belongs to someone else." The band stopped playing. No signal, no instruction. They simply felt the room. 300 people stood in complete silence. "You lied to me," Aldrich said. Quiet, measured, more frightening for both. "You lied to my daughter, and you used my family's name to extend credit you had no right to." He took Solane's arm. She looked at Callum, confusion, then the cold clarity of someone understanding that what they believed was real was always constructed. She looked at the ballroom, the flowers, the 300 people watching her in perfect silence. She looked at her father and let him lead her toward the door. Callum tried to follow. "Solane, please." One of Aldrich's staff stepped between them, politely, immovably. The door closed. The venue manager stepped forward. "Mr. Dre, the payment for this evening has been reversed. The account used was frozen. The outstanding balance is $51,000. That payment cleared weeks ago. The reversal was initiated by the legal account holder. I am the legal account holder." "Not as of this afternoon. Ownership of the firm was transferred at 4:47. Your access to all accounts was closed at 5:15. She held out a document. He took it. His hands were not steady. He read the first paragraph. The color left his face completely, all at once, the way certainty leaves when it has been entirely removed, rather than merely shaken. Rio steadied. He did not go to Callum. He walked to the venue manager first, spoke to her quietly, placed a card in her hand. She looked at it. Her expression changed in the specific way expressions change when a name confirms something a person had half suspected. She looked up at him, nodded once, walked away with the card held differently than anything she had held all evening. Then Rio turned and crossed the ballroom toward Callum. Every conversation that had restarted stopped again. 300 people. Absolute silence. Callum looked at him, really looked at him for the first time, took in the suit, the stillness, the tattoo at his throat that anyone with knowledge of certain families and soul could read like a sentence. Callum did not have that knowledge, but his body understood before his mind caught up. He knew, in the way the body knows things before there are words for them, that the man walking toward him was not something he had encountered before. "Who are you?" he said. "Someone you should have researched," Rio said, "before you sent my guest an invitation." His voice was entirely level, the quiet of a man who has never needed volume to be heard. You wanted Charlotte Osei to sit in this room and watch you win, so I allowed it. The ceremony, the vows, the first dance. I let you stand in front of everyone you know and feel it." He paused. "Then I took it away. Not before you had it. After." He produced a single folded document, extended it. "Dre Consulting was acquired through a holding company. Every contract you have signed in recent months has been with my organization. As of 4:47 today, ownership has been transferred." He paused. "To Charlotte Osei, the woman who built it." Callum looked at the document, looked up, found Charlotte across the room. She sat exactly as she had sat through the ceremony, back straight, hands folded, in the crimson dress, looking at him with the expression of someone who has been patient for a very long time and has arrived at the moment without hurry. "One more thing," Rio said. "The mechanism that made this acquisition possible was a clause in a joint venture agreement from the second year of the firm, a clause allowing third-party acquisition under specific performance conditions, written by Charlotte years ago. She built the structure that made all of this possible. She simply did not have the resources to activate it herself." He let that sit. "She wrote the lock. I provided the key. The mortgage on the house has been called. 60 days. Your employment with the firm is terminated today. All access to company assets is revoked." "This is not legal," Callum said, hollow. "I will—" "Everything was legal. Reviewed by 4 firms. You signed every document. You simply did not read them carefully. One step closer. You confused access with ownership. It tends to be expensive." Rio turned, walked back across the ballroom. Charlotte stood as he approached. The crimson dress moved with her. She took his arm. They walked out together. Behind them, Callum Dre stood in the center of his own reception, in the venue he had chosen to make a point, surrounded by the 300 people in front of whom he had stood and felt like he had won, holding a document that explained in clean, legal language exactly how completely and deliberately the evening had ended. The lights dimmed, just slightly, just enough. Guests moved toward the exits, quietly, the specific quiet of people leaving a structure that is no longer sound. By 7 o'clock, the ballroom was empty, the cake untouched, tables set for a party that had concluded before anyone said so. Callum Dre stood alone in the center of it, holding a piece of paper. They drove in silence for several minutes, the city passing outside the windows, people living ordinary evenings entirely unaware that 3 blocks behind them a man's certainty had been precisely dismantled in the middle of his own wedding reception. Charlotte said, "You waited until after the vows." "Yes." "You could have stopped the whole thing before it started." "Yes." "Why didn't you?" Rio looked out at the passing city. "Prevention is clean. People recover from it. They tell themselves it could have gone differently, that the outcome was not inevitable." He paused. "But taking something away after a man has stood in front of everyone he knows and felt like he won, that stays. That does not go away." Charlotte thought about Callum's face, about the exact moment understanding had arrived in his eyes, about the particular quality of that ballroom silence, 300 people holding their breath at once. "That was cruel," she said. "Yes, more than I expected." "Does it bother you?" She answered honestly and without hesitation, "No." Something shifted in his expression, small, genuine. "There is something I want you to understand," he said. "My family, what we are. I will not dress it in polite language because you returned documents without asking what they were worth, and a woman who does that has earned the plain version." She waited. "My family built its power over 3 generations through means that are not discussed in polite settings, relationships that are enforced rather than chosen. I have spent 5 years trying to move us into legitimate business. There are people who do not want that to happen. The man who stole those documents was making a statement about what happens to people who try to leave." "What happened to him?" she said. Ryo said nothing. She understood that the nothing was the answer. Is it dangerous, she said, being close to you? Sometimes. For people around you? I will not pretend otherwise. There will always be risk at the edge of my world. What I can tell you is that anyone who comes near you comes through me first. A pause, and I do not lose. She looked at him, at the tattoo at his throat, at the man who had spent 8 months building the mechanism to give her back what was hers, and then executed it with complete precision. Okay, she said. They had dinner at a small restaurant that did not advertise. At some point, Charlotte realized she was laughing, genuinely, without managing herself, just laughing with the part of herself she had learned over 2 careful years to keep stored away. She noticed that she had stopped noticing. He noticed her noticing. What? He asked. I was thinking that I have not done this in a long time. Dinner? Dinner without thinking about everything else the whole time. He looked at her. You are allowed to stop. I know. You do not behave like you know. She thought about it honestly. I built something once and lost it because I was not watching the people around me closely enough. I was so focused on the work that I missed what was happening right next to it. I told myself I would not make that mistake again. So you stopped trusting people. I stopped trusting people carelessly. He turned his glass slowly on the table, considered it without rushing toward an answer. There is a version of that, he said, that keeps you safe, and a version that keeps you alone. She looked at him. Which version am I doing? I think, he said, you are deciding. Outside, the city moved, quiet and entirely indifferent to the two of them. 2 people from different worlds who both understood, from inheritance and from experience, what it meant to be patient for a very long time and then move decisively. What it meant to build something that others tried to take, what it meant to hold on anyway. Building something new, not loudly, not with announcement, with intention. 4 months later, the sign on the 15th floor read OSE Consulting. Her name, her floor, her firm. Built twice. The first time for someone else, the second time for herself. The corner office had floor-to-ceiling windows. She stood at the glass sometimes and felt nothing nostalgic, only clear. The clarity of someone who has arrived exactly where they were always supposed to be. Korean investment partners through Real's legitimate network, Japanese market entry, 3 new sectors, the resources and reach she had spent years working toward. Her phone buzzed. Tokyo meeting? She typed back. They signed, all 3 markets. We move next quarter. A pause, then, I know. Then, my mother is asking about grandchildren again. Charlotte laughed, alone in her corner office. She had met Real's mother twice, once in Seoul, once here. The woman had looked at her with the attention of someone assessing a structural investment for every point of failure. She had said in Korean, "You are stronger than you appear." Not a compliment, the correction of a first impression. Charlotte had replied in Korean, which she had been learning for 4 months, "I have had to be." Real's mother studied her. Then, "Good. My son's world asks difficult things of the people in it. He needs someone who does not need protecting from it." Charlotte said, "He does not need to protect me." The older woman nodded once, returned to her tea. That was all, but it was enough. She had heard through industry channels what had happened to Callum. He had challenged the acquisition, found nothing actionable. He had looked for comparable work. His name now carried a different kind of weight, the kind that made people careful. Last she heard, he was somewhere smaller, nothing notable. Celine Vance had remarried 4 months later, someone thoroughly vetted. Charlotte did not think about either of them. Her assistant knocked. "The board is ready." She straightened her jacket, the one that cost what it cost because she had earned the right to spend that kind of money on something she wore to her own boardroom. She walked in. 12 executives stood when she entered. Her firm, her board, her work. She sat at the head of the table. "Let's begin," she said. And they did. There is a version of this story where Charlotte carries what happened forward as weight, where it makes her smaller, where she disappears into the quiet and calls it peace. That is not this story. This is the version where she kept the copies. Every email, every draft, every document that proved what she had built. Not because she knew she would ever use them, because her mother had raised her to understand that what you build is yours, even when someone else is standing in front of it, even when their name is on the wall, even when the world has decided, for now, to pretend otherwise. This is the version where she returned a stranger's documents without asking what they were worth, made one phone call on a quiet evening, walked into a room in a red dress, and sat in the fourth row and waited. You do not have to be loud to be dangerous. You do not have to announce yourself to be seen. The most powerful thing Charlotte Osei did in this entire story was not walking into that wedding. It was keeping everything, quietly, for years, while the world told her she had nothing left. She kept everything, and when the moment arrived, she was ready. If this story found you when you needed it, leave a comment and tell me which part stayed with you. I read every single one. And if you know someone who has been building quietly, who has been patient longer than anyone should have to be, share this with them. Not to stir anything up, just so they know the work was real. It always was. If you are new here, subscribe. Every week I bring you a story that makes you feel something true. That is the only promise I have ever made on this channel, and I have never broken it. I will see you in the next one.